Did you know these 7 things about Easter? Sadly, many Christians erroneously call this day Easter. It is more correctly called Resurrection Sunday. Easter is a pagan term, and it is the English pronunciation of the ancient goddess of fertility and sex. Many pagan springtime festivals featuring this goddess were conducted in the ancient world at just about the same time the Jewish celebration of Passover, and then, of course, eventually the Christian celebration of the resurrection. This is why this particular pagan celebration is associated with bunnies and eggs and springtime flowers, all of which are rich symbols of fertility and sex. These symbols have nothing to do with the celebration of Resurrection Day. This pagan goddess came out of the Assyrian and Babylonian cultures as well as the ancient Northwest Semitic cultures. She was interchangeably called by these names. The late English pronunciation of these names is Easter. Did you know that the pagan springtime Easter celebrations were incorporated into the Roman Catholic traditions in order to appease the Roman government and the paganized citizens of the Roman Empire? This was a source of extreme controversy among many Christians and church leaders. Many bodies of worship inside and outside the early Catholic hierarchy refused to incorporate the pagan celebrations. This controversy started as early as the early 300s AD. Sadly and shamefully, this is why today many Christian churches still refer to Resurrection Sunday as Easter. In the New Testament, in the original Greek manuscripts, the word Passover is used 29 times. The King James Version translators got it correct 28 times. Sadly, they got it incorrect in Acts chapter 12 when they translated the Greek word for Passover as Easter. That's right, the King James Version actually uses the pagan word Easter when the original language clearly says Passover. Many believe that this incorrect translation was largely because of the Catholic and the early British cultural influence over the King James Version translation. Others believe that it was done purposely to indicate that Herod's attempt to execute Peter aligned not only with the Jewish Passover but with the Roman pagan festivals of Easter. If that is so, then inserting the word Easter would have been an editorial and interpretive insertion, because the original Greek word is Passover. The time of Resurrection Sunday always corresponds with the Jewish Passover. It is always the first Sunday after the establishment of the Jewish Passover feast day. This is because Jesus was celebrating the ancient Passover meal with his disciples, when just shortly after the meal he would be arrested and crucified. Jesus was not crucified on a Friday. This is another Catholic misinterpretation of Scriptures. Passover of that week was Thursday night at 6 p.m. The entire day of Thursday was called Preparation Day. Jesus took the Passover on Wednesday of that week. To eat the meal 24 hours early was allowed by the ancient Jewish customs. And Jesus was crucified on Thursday morning at 9 a.m. He was dead by 3 p.m. The Passover feast started at 6 p.m. Jesus became our Passover lamb and fulfilled the feast of Passover on Thursday afternoon. By Friday, he had been in the tomb 1 night and 1 day. The promise was on its way to being fulfilled. For this reason, it can still be called Good Friday. With his crucifixion on Thursday afternoon, by the time Sunday morning came, this would have Jesus in the tomb 3 full nights and rising on the 3rd full day, in direct fulfillment of Jesus' promise and scriptural prophecies. The Sunday that Jesus rode into Jerusalem and the Thursday he was crucified were direct fulfillments of specific days mentioned in the Old Testament. Sunday of that week was the 10th day of the first month. It was the day that the Jews were to choose their lamb, according to Exodus 12. It was the day that Jesus rode into Jerusalem and the adoring crowd exclaimed that he was the Messiah, the Son of David. They were choosing their lamb. Many of the same crowds would later cry out for his crucifixion. Amazingly, they would do this early on Thursday morning. It would now be the 14th day of the first month. That same law required that the lamb be slain on the 14th day of the first month. Little did the people know that they were fulfilling prophecy to the letter with their very declarations about Jesus. Jesus' resurrection was a direct fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy and an Old Testament feast day. In Psalm 14:10 and Psalm 49:9, written 1,000 years before the Christ event, these passages declare that the Holy One of God, in other words, the Messiah or the Christ of God, would not see decay. That passage, of course, assumes that the Holy One of God would be killed, and he would be placed in a tomb. However, he would not see decay. That is interesting, because decay sets in the human body after 3 days. This is why Jesus purposely waited until the 4th day that Lazarus was in the tomb before he raised him from the dead. He wanted the people to know that Lazarus was indeed dead and in the decay stage when Jesus raised him. Jesus was raised on the 3rd day, however. The Holy One of God did not see decay, just as the 1,000-year-old prophecy proclaimed. The feast day that the resurrection fulfilled was the Feast of First Fruits. According to Leviticus 23, it always falls on the Sunday after Passover. Always it falls on a Sunday. It was the day that Jesus became the first fruits from among the dead. It was the day that Jesus sealed everything he ever said or claimed. He sealed the work of the cross. He sealed our salvation and our eternal life with an empty tomb. Jesus has risen, and because he lives, you can live also, if your faith and your trust are in Jesus Christ.